It's our first live from the hive of the season. Yay! So yes, I'm joined here by Eliese. We are at Heritage Park right now. And so before we get started, I want to highlight a few programs that we've got going on throughout the summer. One of them is our hive tours here at Heritage Park. They happen every Tuesday throughout the summer. So if you want to walk through a hive with Eliese, try some honey fresh from the hives, definitely check that program out. Bring some friends, bring your family. It'll be a great time. We also have some free courses online at the moment on our website, abcbees.buzz. So if you're new to beekeeping, you can check out our Orientation to Hobby Beekeeping course. You'll learn all about equipment, hive placement, where to find bees. And then we also have a free Gardening for Bees course, which we ran with Stacey Cedergren last year. And she has some really great insight on what plants to plant for pollinators and all that good stuff. Finally, we are running our NATE post-secondary accredited level 1 beekeeping course this summer. Courses begin August 2nd and 3rd, so you've got that to look out for. So again, if you want to level up your beekeeping, check that out. And now I pass it over to Eliese.
Hey everyone, so welcome to our first live of the hive for the year. So today we have a whole bunch of questions that came in through the Q&A on our Instagram feed. But today we're going to go through a beehive and we're going to look at a colony that has deep boxes in the brood nest and mediums for honey supers, and how to super with those mediums when you only have deep frames below, and how to kind of shuffle those things around. So we're going to do that, and then Ashley's going to cue some questions as we go through from either you guys in the chat here on the live session or the questions that have come up preemptively before we started the session today. And we're going to kind of work our way through how to super, because we need to be making space for honey and suppressing swarm potentials. So let's get started. Okay, so we have some hives here at Heritage Park. We have 6 colonies. They're paid for and subsidized and licensed by Lowen Skincare, Fairmont Palace Hotel, and then these little puppies are Kent of Inglewood and Knifeware. Now today I lost my hive tool, so I am going to use my trusty dusty pocket knife. So just so you know, I'm using a knife to beekeep today. We are going to be going through the hive in a standard inspection model, which means that we're going to be working from the bottom up. Okay, we never inspect from the top down. We're inspecting from the bottom up. So I like to organize my bee boxes of the colonies. So the top box, no matter how high my hive is, will be exploded furthest away. So the exploded version on the horizontal in front of the landing board. So if any bees fall in the grass, they can smell their parent hive and creep back in. Top box goes here. This one is full of honey already. Holy moly. My second box here, medium. Now, what I'm actually going to do, deep. Let's see if I can get this thing open without breaking my knife. Deep and the bottom frame. So in the brood nest in this colony, we have deep boxes, deep frames. These can get really heavy. So we had someone ask, I think it was Jennifer
From Wild Prairie Honey.
Wild Prairie Honey. She was asking about transitioning completely out of deeps, which I get it. These boxes full of honey at a deadlift is over 100 pounds, right? So it can get pretty heavy. So if we go through our regular hive inspection, working like a filing cabinet, in this case I like to use my needle nose as my hive tool. What I always like to do is, no matter where you are in your beekeeping, whether you've been doing it for a decade or doing it for your first year, is I like to checkerboard. Now checkerboarding is taking frames and replacing them with new frames with foundation or foundationless. So for instance, if we look at this colony, come in closer here, Ashley. This is a brand new frame that I added only probably 3 weeks ago. We have hatching brood. The bees drew it out. So a brand new frame this year. So I always like to checkerboard and add new frames. This is how I draw medium frames. As I draw medium frames in a deep box. I cannot put these into a medium, but I can put a medium into a deep. So when we look at this colony, even now, this frame is almost all honey. Okay? There's no brood on it whatsoever. It's just exclusively a honey frame. So what I like to do, especially this time of year, having lots of honey in the brood nest is a no-go. I don't like to have any honey in the brood nest really, unless it's on the frames with bees. As soon as I have a whole frame like this, I want to remove it. I either am removing it up into a super, which of course if all your supers are mediums, that's not ideal, or I'm extracting it. So this is where having a hydrometer to measure the moisture content of the honey on the frame will help. You never want to be above 21% moisture content of the honey. So if I'm trying to transition out of deeps, what I'll actually do is I'll have a third box that's a deep box, and it's going to go on this hive, but it will take this frame, I'll put it in the third box, and then what I end up doing is I will drop a medium frame in here. So for instance, if this was like a brand new super, because I didn't bring supers today, this is a brand new super, so it is, you can see here, there's not much in it. I would take this frame and I would checkerboard it. So if this was just foundation, it'd be fine. And I could fit it in here. So I could do that with, this frame is probably all honey as well. It's on the outer perimeter. Let's lift it up. Look at that, all honey and pollen. There's some space here. So I would take this frame, put it in the deep box that I have, and then I would take a medium frame that was either foundation or empty. So this one is pretty empty, and I would place it into the deep box. Now when I come back later, after the colony is developing, what I'm going to find in this medium frame is actually probably an additional 2.5 inches of comb suspended off the bottom of this frame. That's totally fine. A lot of times what that is, it'll be drone brood, because your colony wants to be 20% drone in the wild, but in a domestic hive with foundation, it'll be less. So as soon as your bees have space, they will develop drone brood. So what I like to do is once they draw this out, you have the drone brood, you come, it's capped, you scrape it off, you just scrape right along the bottom here. You end up with this 2.5 inch drone brood comb. That's your drone culling, because your varroa mites and your integrated pest management. So you end up scraping off the drone brood, brush the bees off it, scrape it off, put it in a pail, feed it to your chickens if you have them, or you can put it in your compost bin. And then I can take this frame that's now fully drawn and I can put it into my super. So I have drawn comb to put into my super full of foundation. So I can actually use the comb that I drew, and this is happening, you know, you can do this in March, April, May, now in June, July. Now I have drawn comb with brood in it to put into my medium super. So I'm hoping that makes sense. So you can actually use your deep equipment slowly, but by shuffling mediums into your deeps. Okay? Any questions about that?
Yeah, so Eliese, with using medium boxes, is it possible to overwinter with medium boxes?
I overwinter with medium boxes all the time. I overwinter with 3 mediums. The bottom medium box usually ends up being brood, and the top 2 mediums end up being really full of honey. So it ends up being basically just short of the volume of 2 deeps, maybe a little bit more, depending on how many frames are honey, how many frames are brood when you compact it for the fall. Okay, any other questions about this shuffle? So this shuffle is kind of funny because we end up with these extra deeps, but we just end up having a third box that's mostly medium frames because we're using these to checkerboard with medium frames in a deep box. So we would have a third box with deep honey frames, checkerboarded or interspaced with mediums. The bees move into that deep box, they draw out the medium frames, they have that 2.5 inch gap across the bottom, And then all you do is you end up scraping off. Yeah, you end up losing wax, but you harvest it, right? And you end up losing potential brood. But again, drone culling's great. And honestly, if your goal is a transition, it's much better to be losing some brood and some comb than it is to continue to struggle if you're not enjoying keeping your hives in deeps. Now, let's talk about swarm suppression. Not about mediums and deeps, swarm suppression. What we have here is an active swarm suppression. We are removing frames of honey out of the brood nest, and we are adding either frames of foundation or empty frames of comb. So this one was a frame of foundation I added. The bees can draw it out. It's very important that you do this because you want to ensure that you aren't finding that your colony is honey bound, where they're backfilling the brood nest with honey. The other benefit of moving honey up, so if we have 3 deeps, pretend, I pull the honey out of this box, I pull the honey out of this box, I add my new frames of drawn comb where the bees have used it last year, or foundation where it's brand new, and I put it in. I try not to ever break up open brood, right? You don't want to break up the feeding cycle of the babies, but I will put it between frames of cap brood or on the perimeter. Then I take all the frames of honey and I can put it in the 3rd box, which again is nurse bees are up there, worker forager bees. You're encouraging that bee activity to move up into that chamber. So we're not only drawing wax in the brood nest, but also luring the bees up. Now you can see from this strategy, there's no use of a queen excluder. I strongly recommend that you do not use a queen excluder until you see your brood nest population plateau. So a lot of times people apply queen excluders in June or in May. As soon as they have 2 boxes, they'll put a queen excluder on in the 3rd box. I don't like to do that because if I have a queen that wants to go gangbusters, so instead of laying 1,500 eggs a day, she wants to lay 2,500 eggs a day. If I'm restricting her with a queen excluder and making her stay in the bottom 2 boxes, and I'm not removing honey frames and making space for her, she could actually decide to swarm. Versus if I keep the queen excluder out, she can brood up into the 3rd, 4th, 5th box. She wants to go crazy. That's awesome. I'll take more splits off that hive. I'll get better honey production. I like that. Then I allow for that to happen. So while I'm inspecting, if you go on our website, there's inspection sheets you can download. It's a good habit to keep track of how many frames of brood there are every time you inspect. So we've got honey, honey, and then this is all brood. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got 8 frames of brood, 2 frames of honey. I go through this one, it's probably the same. 8 frames of brood, 2 frames of honey. I've got 16 frames of brood. When I come back 10 days from now, and it's 16 frames of brood, 16 frames of brood, we're headed toward July equinox. The colony should start to reach that peak in that bell curve of the bee season right at the top. Once you reach that consistency in the brood nest size, then feel free to apply a queen excluder if you're going to use one. Okay? Then you know you're not actually restricting the ability for the queen to lay out if she wants to go crazy. Okay? Rule number 1 of a queen excluder. Always, always make sure that if you're using a queen excluder that you're not just placing empty boxes of foundation or brand new equipment without any comb in it above the queen excluder. Your odds of getting that colony to use that space and draw that wax is very low. So if you're a brand new beekeeper, brand new equipment, do not use a queen excluder. You'll find less wax production. And rule number 2, if you're using a queen excluder, it is imperative that you ensure that the honey frames are removed from your brood nest, because you can end up with a honey-bound colony where you end up with more than 4, maybe 8 frames full of honey, and the queen will want to do a late season swarm in August. Okay. Now, what other questions do we have going on, Ashley?
So before we take on another question, I am trying this new feature out on our live. It's a poll, so I want to know, have you started supering your hives yet this summer? Oh, Is it there? Let me know if you see it, and if you don't, we'll try something. But anyways, we'll go on to the next question. But Eliese,
Yes.
if my hive does swarm,
Yes.
what do I do with my queen? Do I requeen her? Do I wait? Do I let the bees decide?
So if your colony swarms, okay, what is likely left behind is a whole bunch of queen cells that are either imminently going to hatch in the next couple of days or have already hatched. So the big problem you have with that is if they've already hatched, you have a virgin in this colony. If you are thinking of replacing the queen and buying a queen to have a mated queen in this colony, you have to inspect the hive, find the virgin, kill the virgin, and introduce the mated queen. So if you're trying to decide whether to introduce a queen or not, that primary decision is going to be based on the fact of, is there a virgin in the hive and am I capable of finding her? Okay? Now, the biggest issue you have if you allow your colony to raise their own queen this time of year is we are in peak flow, which means nature's providing an abundance of nectar and pollen to your bees, and your bees are bringing it in overload. When you have a queenless colony, you have a lot of brood that's ready to hatch very soon, probably the next 2 weeks, right? Because once the queen goes on her swarm flight, you only have about 3 weeks until there's no brood at all in the colony. You're waiting for that queen to hatch, go on her nuptial flight, and start to lay. So you might have 16 frames of brood. The following week, you'll have 8 frames of brood. And the following week after that, you might only have 2 frames of brood. You have a huge colony vacancy in this hive. You must checkerboard with either drawn comb or foundation. If you don't, you're missing the opportunity of having nurse bees, which are wax-producing bees, that don't have baby bees to nurse, and you're missing the opportunity to push them into wax production. Number 2, if you don't push for space during this really crucial time, what will happen is the colony will send out all these foragers to get all this food, and then their brood nest will become completely honey-bound. So by the time that virgin goes on her nuptial flight and comes back mated, she may only have 2 or 3 frames in your brood space in the bottom boxes to even lay. And then if you haven't been checkerboarding or creating more space, you may not have comb to use to build up that space. You might only have foundation. And you can end up with a late season secondary swarm happening, in late August or September. And that's devastating. Your parent colony won't have a time to readjust. You'll miss out on productivity of the brood nest, and you'll have a hard time doing brood production before winter bees are necessary for the winter cluster. So if your bees have swarmed and you have a virgin in the hive, it's very important that you're aggressively adding foundation or drawn comb to the colony. Do not hesitate on supering.
Jennifer makes a really good point here in the comments. Jennifer says that virgin queens are much smaller than a mated queen. So
much smaller.
Gotta keep a good eye out for them.
And they run. They are runners, right? They're spreading their pheromone throughout the colony. So they aren't consistent in their behavior or even where you would likely find them in a colony. It's very irregular. So it can be very difficult to spot a virgin, especially if you're already having a hard time spotting a mated queen. Spotting a virgin can be very hard. So sometimes in that case, it's nice to have a mentor come help you find her to pinch her, or just to put your hands in the air and say, you know what? Let's see what this whole queen rearing thing is about. I'm going to sit back and observe and see what happens. So this colony's got a lot of hatching brood, a lot of pollen in it. It's extremely productive. So I supered this colony, I think it ended up being 3 weeks ago, because I have hatching brood in it. And so let's have a look. We've got lots of brood happening here. So we've got 8 frames of brood. We've got 2 frames of honey. So I want to put these honey frames back in. They're not my favorite. I don't like having them here. I'm going to turn this around, put the empty comb side facing the cluster, honey facing outward to increase their capacity for storage. So it's okay to flip them around. But as you can see, I have honey in the perimeter. I haven't broken up the brood nest with honey. I don't want to break up the brood nest at all, especially the open brood. If I'm breaking up brood at all, I'm breaking up capped brood because those babies don't need attendance. But this is a lot of mix of capped brood, pollen, and honey. And so I'm going to put the honey on the outside. So let's slowly slide this in. Let gravity do its thing. Okay. Now, oh, that's why it's tight. I have a medium frame in here. I forgot I shoved a medium frame in, so let's find that medium frame. I think it was this one. Sorry, girls. There it is. Because usually I like to run 9s in my deeps. As you can see, I don't like to use a bee brush, so that's why it was so congested. I like to run 9 in my brood nest, 10 in my mediums. The reason I like running 9 in my brood nest is it's more space for me to manipulate and move the frames without rolling or crushing bees. Like you saw, it's a little bit tight for me to slide this down. I don't like being tight with my bees. So let's have a look. Got our deep box here. This is really quite heavy. I would say this is probably over 70 pounds. So this one very well could be honey bound, this brood frame, this brood box. Whoops. So let's have a peek and see where we're at for honey production in here. So this is all honey. You see I tipped the frames on the landing board, so if any of the queen is on there, if any of the bees are on there, they fall into the landing board, they can crawl back into the hive. This is all honey. Okay, let's keep going. What else do we have? So 2 frames of honey. Now we have lots of eggs and brood, but honey, look at that. So honey on one side, brood on the other. I'm going to face the brood toward the middle so it's closer to the nurse bees. This is a new frame being drawn out, you can see from this side, but it's full of brood. This is great. Now you can see this like suspended comb here. This is also known as bridge comb. It's also known as burr comb. This is just bees being creative with spatial use. So if you're not keeping your frames nice and snug, so I have 9 frames here, not 10, it allows for them to have more liberty. So we've got a nice frame of cap brood here. Okay, we're looking for honey. I've seen eggs, I know I'm queen right. Lots of brood, but lots of honey. You see all this capped honey. They're already ripening off the honey. So this hive is going gangbusters. So right now, we've got 2 honey, 1, 2, 3, 4 brood. Got 5 brood, another beautiful frame of bees. Six brood. So we had 8 brood below, 6 brood above. So far we're at 14 frames of brood just in this double deep. Okay. Now if we were supering properly, I had the 2 frames of honey below taken out, put in a deep box, medium frames put in to draw out, as well as for, again, suppressing swarms and increasing wax production. And in this hive, I've got another full frame of honey here. Wowzers. Okay. So I would have, in the end, 4 deep frames in a deep box, 4 medium frames in the deep boxes below, 2 in each, drawing comb. And then I would have a deep box that would have 4 frames of deep, checkerboarded, with 6 medium frames, or 5 medium frames, depending if it's a 9 or 10, checkerboard in between. So it ended up looking from below like this. Right? We'd have medium, deep, medium, deep, medium, deep. And what you're doing is you're encouraging wax drawing in a deep box, but the wax you're drawing is medium frames of wax. The bees pull it out, And if it ends up being a honey box, the medium frames that you pull out, that's great. The burr comb across the bottom, the 2.5 inches, fill it with honey, then they fill it with capping. You cut that off, you have cut comb honey to take and put on your table or to sell. So it allows for you to slowly build your medium wax production, so you have medium supers, medium brood boxes down the road. If you're going to treat with a synthetic pesticide in the fall or in the spring, it's important that you keep track of that equipment. So if you're going to be using medium boxes exclusively for honey production and they're in the brood nest, I would make sure I shuffled those out or didn't have them in when those treatments took place. So we've got this big honey frame, so we've got lots of honey, so 4 frames of honey. Now I want to show you these supers. 2 or 3 weeks ago, so the beginning of July, I added these 2 medium supers. Now they were fully drawn out because, I mean, I've been doing this for a while. I have a lot of bee equipment. I've got a lot of bee equipment. Actually, I've got 3 frames of honey in here. Sorry, not 2. So we'd end up with 5 frames of honey in a deep box, 4 or 5 frames of mediums, and then 5 frames of mediums into the deep boxes. So in the end, it would look like I have 3 deeps, but really I would have 2.5 deeps. Half deep, half medium in a deep box. So I added these. So these are mediums, no queen excluder, and some of them are all drawn out. So the bees, I extracted them last year. The bees are cleaning up the wax and they're working their way through. Now, I want to show you guys this super because it's heavy. So let's go through it because this is only 3 weeks that this has been on and it's full on. Now, Ashley, are there any more questions coming in?
Yeah, just about honey.
Yeah.
While we're talking about it, when would you typically start to pull those honey frames from the hives?
If the honey's capped, I would start extracting now. It's really nice because you can actually, the honey that's capped now is likely spring honey or late spring honey. So if you taste it, the flavor profile of the capped honey will taste different than the uncapped honey right now. Day and night, when I have the tours come through, we try both and they have completely different flavor profiles. So it's not a bad thing to harvest the spring honey, especially if you're not wanting to manage hives that are taller than you. Having a small extraction, radial extractor, having a consistent setup will really increase not only the number of days you're extracting, but the amount of work done in a weekend on extracting. If you're only extracting a box or half a box at a time, extracting is actually quite lovely, and then you put the empty frames back into the hive. So this box is really heavy. They're already putting honey away. There's some crystallized cells because there was some crystallized cells remaining in these frames when I installed it. Let's have a look here. Holy. So we've got brood up here and a queen. So here we go. Let's see if you can spot that queen. She's gold. So the knife wearing Kent of Inglewood, they have 1 gold queen and 1 dark queen. She's almost black. This is the gold queen. Look at her amber color. So her workers are also very light colored as well. So she's actually brood rearing in this 3rd box. So that's unusual, but not crazy. I don't know why she's up here. It's not terrible either. I'm not going to move anything around. I mean, I could put this super down between this box and switch box 3 and 4 around so the brood nest is closer. But I actually don't want to do that. And the reason is this hive is already, this box is already full of honey. So we have 1 frame of brood so far in this upper chamber, and the rest of it is full of honey and pollen. Like I told you, this box felt really heavy when I picked it up. And this is all just honey. So this colony, honestly, they're cleaning up the frames in here. It's empty foundation, a little bit of honey. If she wants to brood lay, this is the super she can lay in. Now, there was a question preemptively before today that someone asked. Here's another full honey frame. You can see the glistening nectar in there. Was, do you super from above or from below? So there is a method of supering, which is the idea of adding additional space, where you can super from below instead of supering from above. This is really funny that she's on here. So the supering from below is called nadiring, and that system comes from Warre beekeeping, which is a method of having a continuous comb in a much more narrow tower. Usually the squares are complete squares, usually about a foot by foot square, and the tower ends up being hollow. There's no frames, and then so the comb itself is one continuous comb structure. And the idea of supering from below is it encourages more wax production space. And the other idea of supering from below is that the colony wants to have the brood nest at the bottom of the hive, because the chimney action of the tower means that the top of the tower will be hotter than the bottom of the tower. And it's important that the bees thermoregulate the brood nest. So they don't want it hotter than 32 degrees Celsius. If it's hotter than that, the larva can dehydrate. You can end up having some distress issues, and it looks like chilled brood, but really it's cooked brood, so they end up kind of dead pupa, dead cat bees, because they get too hot. So in the wild, if there's bees in a hollow of a tree or a swarm suspended, they tend to have their brood below, honey above, not only because honey is really good concrete anchor to keep the weight of the hive counterbalanced like a pendulum. You want the weight at the top, not at the bottom of the pendulum, or it could collapse. But the thermal regulation, heat rises, evaporating the moisture off of the honey, creating an air conditioning unit of cooling the superorganism down. And then the heat rising also keeps the cluster, or the babies in the brood nest below, cooler in a hot weather day. So supering from below is actually not a terrible idea, but you don't have to do it when it comes to Langstroth beekeeping. Not only because the cavity size is significantly bigger, so the chimney action isn't as concentrated as it would be in a smaller Warre hive 1 foot by 1 foot square design, but it's not a continuous comb, so you can actually have the removable frames to manipulate what goes where. So that's where you can actually use the honey in the brood nest and pull it up, the empty foundation in, and then have that honey box above lure the bees up and help them build not only brood production in the upper chamber, brood production below. But it's worth trying. If you're interested in figuring out, is supering from above for wax production better than supering from below for wax production, try it. Take a box, put 3 frames of foundation in the middle of the bottom box, and put 3 frames of foundation in the middle of the supered box, and see which box has drawn comb first. To be honest, the best place to draw wax is near the brood nest, because young bees are wax producing bees. So always when you're attempting to draw wax, even in my recommendations, is to always put foundation in your brood nest, because young bees are wax producing bees, and brood nest temperature is the perfect temperature for wax production. The malleability of the wax is much better. So I'm sure you'll find whatever technique you choose to use, whether it's supering from below or above, you'll see a difference in production. So that's my answer to that. That's not really concrete, but it is kind of explains why and how the bees produce wax there. Any other questions?
None coming in, but if you do have any questions, if you're watching this live or if you're watching the recording, feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll be sure to answer them.
That's right. Well, thank you for joining us for Live from the Hive. I hope to see you. If you haven't taken a bee course with level 1, if you're interested in a field day, join me here at Heritage Park on Tuesday nights. The schedule is at the Heritage Park website. You get to drive in after hours and enjoy the ghost town with me here in the bee yard, the Canada Pacific Railroad. And yeah, look forward to seeing you all in person soon.
Yeah, and our next Live from the Hive, if you want to mark it in your calendars, is August 10th. So same time, same place. Thank you, Knifeware and Kent of Inglewood, for your beautifully painted hives. Your bees are doing great. But other than that, thanks for joining, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Hey, it's Eliese with ABC Bees. Thanks for watching. I hope you liked the video, and if you liked it, there's a lot more coming your way. But if you're ready to get your fingers sticky, join us at abcbees.ca. We have free resources, ebook, and free courses. And we even have post-secondary accredited online learning programs. If you're ready to get beekeeping, we're ready to meet you where you're at. And hey, you don't even have to put your pants on.